The United Auto Workers Union represents about 400,000 members and last week officially endorsed President Biden's re-election. For more, we're joined by its president, Shan Fein. Welcome back to the program. What does the president need to do to win Michigan and not lose it like in 2016?
I think he has to keep doing what he's been doing all along. I mean, look, we've said this from the outset of my presidency that our endorsements are going to be earned. And we were clear about that. And when you look at these two candidates, it's very clear the difference between both of them. One of them, President Biden, has always bet on the American worker and stood with the American worker, and he proved that during this presidency. He stood up with us for the first time in U.S. history. We had a sitting president join striking workers on a picket line. He saved a community. He worked with us. Belvidere, Illinois, that plant was closed. The community was written off for dead. President Biden came into the table with us and worked with us to save that community and bring back not just Belvidere, but a second plant.
Yeah. Mr. Fein, I'm going to take a quick break because I want to talk to you more without interruption about what's happening in your industry and what's happening in the Midwest. We have more questions in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation with the president of the UAW, Shan Fein. Sir, back in 2016, your former UAW president said an estimated 28% of members voted for Donald Trump. Do you expect a similar breakdown this election?
I think it'll be less. I truly believe we're going to do the same thing we did during our contract campaign, during our strike. You know, when we said endorsements will be earned, we meant it. And we're going to deal with facts and truth. And I believe the overwhelming majority of UAW members and working class people, when the facts and the truth are put in front of them, will support Joe Biden for president. That's why we made this decision. You know, look, when you look at these two candidates, Joe Biden has a history of serving others and serving the working class and fighting for the working class, standing with the working class. Donald Trump has a history of serving himself and standing for the billionaire class, and that's contrary to everything that working class people stand for. When you look at the issues during our contract campaign, retirement security, better wages, health care, wanting our time back, wanting our lives back, that's what matters. That's why 75% of the American public stood with the UAW in our fight, and I believe that's why a huge majority of our members and working class people will side with President Joe Biden in the upcoming election.
Well, it used to be people thought of unions as very much tied to the Democratic Party, but we saw the Teamsters Union President Sean O'Brien meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago earlier this month. He's having a roundtable with him this week. I know President Biden's also been invited as well. Do you anticipate that this other union will go a different direction and choose Mr. Trump?
I can't fathom any union would support Donald Trump for president. Let's be real and let's look at facts. Donald Trump says it best. Look at both their careers. Donald Trump, in his own words, when he had his reality TV show, The Apprentice, and when he was president, when he was in the White House, he had two favorite words: "You're fired." And he cycled through White House staff like toilet paper. And when he was in 2008, we were in a recession. Donald Trump blamed the workers for what was wrong with the Big Three. Joe Biden bet on the American worker. You go to 2015, Donald Trump talked about doing a rotation of our good-paying jobs in the Midwest somewhere where they pay less, driving a race to the bottom, wanting us to beg for our jobs back at lower pay. He didn't support when Lordstown Assembly, when he was president, when Lordstown Assembly plant was slated for closure, he told people, don't sell your houses. What did he do? Nothing. When GM went on strike in 2019, what did he do to support the striking workers? What did he say? Not a word. Joe Biden, in 2008, he stood with the UAW. He stood with working class people in that recession, and they gave us a pathway forward. When he's been president, he stood with us for the first time in history. A U.S. sitting president stood on the picket line with us. Yeah. And he helped save a community, not sit back and do nothing while a community was destroyed.
Well, you, I know, have had a lot of frustrations with this transition to electric vehicles. Ford's CEO has said they will require 40% less labor to produce cars than combustion vehicles. Is it difficult to convince your members that President Biden's push to go electric won't ultimately put them out of a job?
Look, our union has a history going back. I saw a statement 54 years ago in 1970. UAW President Leonard Woodcock was talking about we needed to get away from the internal combustible engine because it's poisoning the environment. Look, the UAW has always been at the forefront of environmental issues and of working class issues. The biggest thing to us is no matter which way we go in this, we're going to have security for our members and for the working class people. It has to be a just transition. That's what we've stood for. We were able to bargain, thanks again to help from the White House and from Secretary of Labor Julie Su. We were able to bargain a contract where we put this work under our master agreements, under our standards, instead of driving a race to the bottom, which is where it was when we found it. So we're not afraid of where we're headed, no matter where this industry goes. Naturally, there's work that has to be done with the infrastructure and things like that. But no matter where this heads, I know one presidential candidate that will be behind us, and that's Joe Biden, and I know another one that could care less about it, and that's Donald Trump.
Well, you got to get voters excited to actually show up and vote in the first place. I know Ford is headquartered out in Dearborn, Michigan. There are a lot of Arab American and Muslim Americans very upset about what's happening in Gaza. You have called for a ceasefire. Joe Biden has not. Is this going to be difficult? Are they underestimating in Washington how painful this is for people in Michigan?
Look, we've been very clear about our position. The UAW has a history of standing up for peace. We've called for a ceasefire, and we're going to continue to pressure and talk with the Biden administration about this issue. I believe they'll do the right thing. And I mean, let's be real here. The other candidate, we know where he stands on this issue, and we know what he did with the embassy and stuff when he was president. So again, there's two very stark contrasts between these two candidates, and we're going to continue to push the Biden administration to do the right thing.
Sir, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. We turn now to the conflict in the Middle East and the Biden administration's efforts to prevent a regional war. White House envoy Amos Hochstein is with us, and he's been working on a diplomatic accord between Israel and neighboring Lebanon. He's also a top advisor to the president on energy. How concerned are you right now that we are about to see another front open up in this war?
Well, I think we should all be very concerned about another front. And in fact, we have a somewhat of a front already. So from the beginning of this conflict, the day after October 7, October 8, there was shelling and action coming from Lebanon towards Israel, reaction. And since then, we've been in a sort of a low-grade fight between Israel and Lebanon. President Biden has been clear that we want to do everything we can to prevent an escalation of that lower-level conflict into an all-out conflict that would drag us further into war and risk civilian lives on both sides. And that's what we're trying to do, is to avoid that.
So Hezbollah has been firing rockets. Israel has been carrying out strikes into southern Lebanon. You had brokered a maritime border between Israel and Lebanon. How close are you to getting a land border negotiated here?
So just over a year ago, we were able to negotiate a maritime boundary, which is really the first time Israel and Lebanon, Lebanon doesn't recognize Israel diplomatically, reached any kind of boundary agreement. What we need to do now is to get to two things. One is the cessation of hostilities across both sides, so that people, over almost 100,000 people on each side, in Lebanon and Israel, are refugees in their own countries because they can't live in southern Lebanon or in northern Israel. So we have to get to a cessation of hostilities. But post-October 7, we also have to make sure that Israelis and Lebanese can live in their homes with security. And that is not just a ceasefire. It requires a more intricate piece of the negotiations to ensure that the Lebanese army is in that area, that there is more parameters of security for civilians. Once we do that, though, we do need to start looking at how do we mark the border, an actual border between the two countries, so that we can have long-term security and long-term peace in an area that's seen so many rounds of conflict over the last several years.
And are you headed back soon?
I will likely head back soon, but I think this is something we do every day, not just when we're in the region. We do this also when we're here.
Because the Israeli government has said time is running short. Their defense minister said, end of January?
Well, I don't know about hard deadlines, but the window for diplomacy is definitely there, and that is what President Biden has said. We have to try to solve this diplomatically. I don't deny that a status quo of where we are now can last forever, and that is why we need to make sure that we can get to diplomatic resolution.
So oil prices jumped Friday. As you know, there was a tanker carrying Russian oil going through the Red Sea that was hit by rockets fired by Houthi militias. And we can see here a lot of ships going through that area have had to take longer routes because of this conflict here. How are you gauging the geopolitical risk when it comes to energy prices going forward?
Well, I think we're in a remarkable situation where we have two global conflicts. One, the ongoing war of Russia's war against Ukraine, and what's happening in the Middle East and the Houthis attacking the ships. So the first thing to remember, we are responding to the Houthi attacks, and this is not an attack on the United States or related to Gaza. This is an attack on the global commercial system, on global shipping lanes. This is not about just the United States. And that's why the reaction has not just been the U.S., it's U.S.-led, but this is a coalition, and a coalition that's growing, both the diplomatic coalition as well as the military coalition.
It's also not stopping the attacks.
Well, I think that we've seen a reduction in attacks. But let's take the example that you gave, the ship on Friday. It was not an American ship, not destined for Israel either. It's part of the global commercial system. It was aided by the U.S. Navy, the French Navy, and the Indian Navy, all vessels that were in the area. So, and saved the ship that was able to then move on safely and securely. The impact on the markets, look, I think that there is clearly a sentiment issue where prices have gone up a little bit because of this. But the actual cost to energy, commodities, cargo ships, yes, they have to go around a further distance. It's more a logistics cost than it is an actual cost. The costs do go up, but if you look at what they impact, the inflationary impacts are relatively muted. And we're going to continue to work to mitigate and degrade the efforts that the Houthis have to attack, but also make sure that we can look at the global markets and make sure they're not affected.
So the Washington Post reported you opposed the decision the White House announced Friday to put limits on some liquefied natural gas projects in order to conduct environmental review. First of all, is that true? And given that we haven't seen LNG prices really move, how significant can this decision really be? It looks very political.
So first, no, it is totally. I don't know who's saying that I opposed it. I did not oppose it. I think this is the right decision. In the White House, in the Department of Energy, and across the administration, there was full support for this decision. I was one of them. Look, we have to look at this decision as for what it is. One, we are today the largest exporter of LNG in the world. Based on what's under construction, the United States will double our exports of LNG, our capacity to export LNG over the next 3-4 years. So we've already done an enormous amount. At some point, you have to stop and say, all right, this is how much we're exporting. We now need to look, what are the economic impacts? Does the market still need significantly more that will come post-2030? And as we learn more, what are the environmental impacts so that we're not just building this out without looking at all of the parameters that needs to be looked at when that's why we do permitting.
Well, Senator Manchin says he's going to hold some hearings to get answers to the questions on what happened here, and we will watch for that. And thank you for coming in. We'll be back in a moment. We're over 100 days into a war that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue. CBS's Charlie DAgata accompanied the Israeli military into Gaza and filed this.
We crossed into southern Gaza through the same breach in the fence that Hamas militants punched through to launch their rampage, where soldiers of the 55th Brigade, 98th Paratroopers Division showed us a discovery they had made. A soldier kept his rifle pointed straight into the darkness down the shaft. Of the hundreds of miles of tunnels beneath Gaza, this one enabled Hamas fighters to infiltrate under open fields undetected, planned long in advance.
Made a combat patrol here, and he found the hole. The hole was here, very small one, with the ladder.
They're finding tunnels and shafts like this everywhere, but this is just a few hundred yards from the crossing itself, and they believe it was used by Hamas militants to attack that day. We push deeper into the territory toward the besieged city of Khan Yunis, witnessing scenes of utter devastation following weeks of heavy bombardment that have not only leveled nearly every building here, it's taken an horrific toll on the civilian population. The largest city in southern Gaza is still thought to be a Hamas stronghold, where militant leader Yahya Sinwar is, or was, hiding out. Hamas health officials say the death toll has now soared to more than 26,000. Among them, more than 10,000 children. We came to what used to be an elementary school in this upscale neighborhood, once a Hamas fighting position, we were told, now an Israeli military base. A few moments ago, there was a loud explosion, and now the skies are filled with smoke. It just gives you an indication of, first of all, how close we are to Khan Yunis itself and how this battle is raging on. We later learned that was a controlled explosion of a building to deny Hamas gunmen places to take cover and counterattack. It's more than just urban warfare, says Lieutenant Colonel Anchi.
They dress with civilian clothing, so they're very difficult to be identified. They move without their ammunition, and they collect it wherever when they pop out from their underground infrastructure, and then they shoot at us. They try to shoot and run away.
The Israeli military say they've got Khan Yunis surrounded. Yet Hamas leaders and the more than 130 hostages still being held are yet to be found. Driving back through the destruction, the challenge is not just about seizing territory above ground, but hunting down what's below.
Charlie DAgata has just returned to London from reporting in the region. Charlie, journalists are not permitted into Gaza to freely report on the war, and that has been the subject of court cases in Israel. So what restrictions did the IDF put on you?
Yeah, Margaret, we cannot get into Gaza from Israel or from Egypt, for that matter, because the Israelis are holding all the cards. The only way you can get in is with the Israeli military on an embed. And what those restrictions mean is, obviously, by virtue of the fact that they're the ones who are showing you around, then they create the narrative of what you can see. And that particular one, we were there for maybe 2.5 hours. We weren't allowed to broadcast it for 24, 48 hours or even talk about it. There are embargo restrictions. In some cases, they want to see the material, but we never have it censored as such. They never tell us to change the shots. It has to do with security issues. This time, they didn't ask to see it at all. But the difficult part is that we don't have any, we're not free to roam. We're not free to get any of our own material or access and speak to anybody else there. This is the third embed that I've had. I haven't seen a single Palestinian. I haven't seen any sign of life or death, haven't been able to get to any of these humanitarian centers or hospitals. So it's been impossible for us to independently report what's going on there, aside from the incredibly courageous work of our colleagues inside Gaza. Indeed,
our producer Marwan Al-Ghul and those people living in the middle of this fight. But you have been in Israel for the better part of 3 weeks, and in that time there has been growing international pressure, including this ruling by the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to prevent acts of genocide, but stopping short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. I wonder what the soldiers you met with think of all this. Are they feeling fatigued?
There's definitely fatigue there. But as for the ruling itself, obviously soldiers never comment on government policy or politics. When you ask them about civilian casualties, certainly genocide, they said they're doing everything they can to avoid it. But Hamas hides in schools, hospitals, tunnels, and many Israelis, or there are many examples of Israeli soldiers shooting unarmed civilians, even Israeli hostages in one case. As for Israel itself, the country is kind of split. Those who back Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who slam those charges of genocide as outrageous and are looking for total victory, and the others who say, look, enough is enough. We need to stop this, at least get a ceasefire in there, at least get the hostages out, and at least discuss some kind of end game.
Charlie, important reporting, and thank you for your context.
Thank you.
And we're joined now by Save the Children CEO, Yanti Soeripto. I want to ask you, Yanti, because you were just back from the region. You were looking into how much aid can get into Gaza right now to help the kids you are so concerned about. What did you learn?
Thanks, Margaret. Yes, I've just come back after a little over 10 days in the region. And I made it all the way to the border, the Rafah crossing. I managed to see the hundreds and hundreds of trucks waiting in Arish to get in. And what we're seeing is still that getting aid into Gaza is still woefully inadequate. We're looking at about 100 130, 150 trucks getting in a day on a good day. When I was there, it was actually not a good day. I think less than 100 came in. And let's remind ourselves that before October 7th, about 500 trucks made it into Gaza every day, and a mixture of aid and commercial supplies. So the number that is getting through is still woefully inadequate, especially because the needs, of course, have skyrocketed. And even if trucks come in, it is an incredibly cumbersome process. Many trucks offloads and onloads along the way. And then when you're into Rafah, to get real last mile delivery or last 100 yards delivery, getting shots in arms of children who need vaccinations, getting food, medical supplies to hospital, getting water to people, that is still incredibly difficult. There's a 1.5 million people stranded in Rafah. People are everywhere. The streets are crowded. Trucks and vans have actually difficulty moving. And it's been almost impossible to get any supplies into the north of Gaza, where there are still hundreds of thousands of people stranded.
Yeah, I mean, those pictures are just incredible, showing what that area of Rafah was like, and now just the concentration of humanity stuck there. I know that you have joined with other humanitarian organizations to say that this is unlike any conflict that you have ever seen in all your years of work. What makes it so different?
It really is. I mean, well, people have nowhere to go. We work in a lot of other crises, from Afghanistan to Sudan to Ukraine, but there, and the situation is also bad, let me just put that out there, but there is still an opportunity for people to flee. Here in Gaza, it is completely impossible, and the density of the people on a very small space of land, now with the constant bombardment after the now long forgotten humanitarian pause we had in November, it makes it almost impossible to do, at scale humanitarian responses. So that makes it hard. We're also incredibly concerned about the health situation, vastly deteriorating. Only a few hospitals are still really operational, and it means that children in particular, who are more vulnerable, are also suffering from what ought to be resolvable, treatable illnesses. Infections, respiratory tract diseases, diarrhea, now become life-threatening because there are no medicine to actually treat them.
The UN agency in Gaza said its services are collapsing as aid is now being paused because of this revelation by Israel that 12 people were tied to the attack on October 7th. I know the Israeli government is saying other aid organizations not tainted with terrorism can step in. You're one of those aid organizations. Can you handle stepping in?
Yeah, I think personally, we think that's an example of some magical thinking. There is no way that the collective humanitarian sector can completely replace UNRWA, in the short space of time that will be necessary. Let's not forget, UNRWA has had 13,000 staff in Gaza. Save the Children currently has 23 staff in Gaza, yes, and hundreds of community volunteers. And many aid organizations are in the same spot.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off because of some breaking news. We'll be right back. We have some breaking news. U.S. Central Command just announced 3 American service members were killed and 25 injured in an attack today on a base in Jordan near the Syrian border. U.S. officials suspect Iranian-backed militias are behind it. We'll be following the story on CBS.